Well, welcome everybody to Haunted Ships and Lighthouses. Actually, I'm going to have June join me on this one because a lot of these places that we're going to be talking about are places we actually got to investigate. So we'll share our own personal experiences from these places. I hope you're okay with that, June.
Thanks for asking me, Ross. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, that's fine.
So getting started with Haunted Ships and Lighthouses. Now, this is actually based off the book Haunted Ships and Lighthouses by David Weatherly and myself, which came out last year. Our next book coming out, and I guess less than a month now, is going to be Haunted Churches.
Yay.
And this is all part of the series, the Haunted series. So you can actually see the rest of the books that are going to be coming out. The first one was Haunted Toys, Haunted Ships and Lighthouses, Haunted Churches. Of course, next one after that I'm working on right now is Haunted Historic Hotels of the Pacific Coast. And then we are going to have Haunted Amusement Parks, Haunted Sex, and the Haunted Underground. So looking forward to all those there. So when we start with haunted ships, of course, the most notorious one is the Flying Dutchman. Now, the Flying Dutchman stories go back to the 1700s. And it was interesting because it's always seen on stormy nights. You will see this, torn up ship that has looked like it has run aground many times, but it'll be still floating and sailing at speeds that they can't explain. And sometimes it's been described to have this hazy green light around it, or it'll come out of a fog that it will come out of nowhere. Now, when people claim to have seen the Flying Dutchman, this could be considered an omen or even doom. Those who are aboard the ship that witness the Flying Dutchman may not have long to live. Now, there are many, many various stories when it comes to the Flying Dutchman, and we could probably do one lecture on the Flying Dutchman alone. But one of my favorite stories that I came across when doing research on this was that the Flying Dutchman would actually try to get close to the ships. And they say that what they want to do is the dead want to have letters delivered to their loved ones. So they try to aboard the ship and of course, give the living these letters to have them delivered. But they say you never want to have them board your ship or receive these letters because you will actually be doomed yourself. Now, 1942 was the last recorded experience of anybody seeing the Dutchman. Now, believe me, there's been other stories more recently, but this actually comes from captains of various ships. So it's not just, people, that are looking from the shore that claim to see the Flying Dutchman. This is actually recorded. Now, folklore has a lot to do with this. And I always ask people, how many believe that a ship can actually be haunted? And a lot of people do believe a ship can be haunted. But there is a misconception when it comes to a ghost ship. Now, the term ghost ship actually refers to the fact that if a ship has actually been abandoned while it's in the middle of the ocean, either the crew has died on the ship or they've completely abandoned the ship for whatever reasons, then the ship is just on its own devices, on the currents, due to the wind, and it just sails around. And they consider that a ghost ship. So when it comes to a haunted ship or seeing the apparition of a ship, this is actually technically would be called a phantom ship. Now, Eliza Battle was a paddle steamer that burned in 1858 in Alabama. And she is reported to reappear fully aflame on cold and windy winter nights to foretell the forthcoming of disasters. After the American schooner, the Young Teaser, was sunk in an explosion, and this is out of Nova Scotia. During the War of 1812, a burning apparition known as a teaser light has been reported on the anniversary. Now, the Mary Celeste is one of the most notorious ships as well. And it's a legend. Started back in 1861 when it was built. And since the very beginning, from its first sailing, they believed that the boat was cursed. And this is all due to a lot of mishaps that the ship would actually experience. Its first venture, the captain actually became ill and died unexpectedly during the voyage. And so this is what started a lot of this. And they had a lot of unfortunate events on many of its adventures. And so a lot of people believe that this ship was actually cursed. Well, it was November 7th of 1872 when the ship was found afloat, a ghost ship. In fact, a vessel had come up to it to figure out what was going on with the ship. It was just, going around radically. And they finally caught up to the ship and realized that there was no one on board. Now, of course, they couldn't figure out what was going on. Everything on the ship seemed fine. There was some water aboard, but nothing that would cause the boat to sink. The cargo was still there, untouched. The captain's room had been ramshackled, like he had tried to get off the boat in a hurry. They weren't sure. But again, it was just a big mystery. What happened to the crew? And they actually towed the boat ashore, and this is when they could actually claim any cargo that had been abandoned. And so, of course, the captain who had discovered the ship wanted to make that claim. And they couldn't figure out, again, what had happened. No one had ever reported any survivors from this crew. And so it had actually become a huge mystery. Was there fraud involved, insurance fraud, piracy was questioned? Well, after years and years of research, they do believe that they may have figured out what was actually going on here. But before I go into that theory, it was actually in 1884 that the ship was restored and it was put back out there, and unfortunately it ran into a reef which totaled the bottom of the ship, and it was lost forever. Now, here's the story that they think actually what happened is in this rendering here. You can actually see that they do believe that the ship was actually struck by another ship. Now, of course, the crew escaped onto the Rumney and actually was to survive. But the interesting thing is they say that, of course, the Mary came back around and struck this ship, causing everybody on that ship to perish. So even the survivors of the Mary died because the Mary came back and sank the other ship. And what they feel what happened is they called it Mary's Revenge because the crew had abandoned her. But what they think happened is when they were trying to escape the Mary, because they thought she was sinking, but she didn't take on enough water to actually sink, is what they think has happened is they left her motors running. And so as they were actually trying to leave after being rescued, the ship came all the way back around and struck them, causing everybody from both ships to perish. Maybe it was Mary's revenge. Now, superstitions. Many sailors and crew are very superstitious. And here are some of the superstitions that they actually believed. Avoid clergymen and cross-eyed people as you make your way to the ship. If you run into them, this will bring ill fortune. Naming a boat with the word that ends with A would also cause bad luck. If a bottle doesn't break during the launching ceremony, the vessel will be plagued with bad luck. Seeing rats leaving the ship was a very good sign of bad luck, and I would probably think rats probably have a better idea why they don't want to be on the ship. Bells heard at sea while someone was aboard someone aboard will die. A shark following the ship. It is rumored that sharks can sense when someone is close to death. Saying the word drown while at sea can bring on the event. Whistling while underway could whistle up a storm. And opening tin cans upside down can cause a capsize, and so can a shoe being left upside down on board. Some captains wouldn't allow flowers aboard because flowers could later be used as a funeral wreath. And causing harm to a seagull will bring bad luck because they believe that seagulls could carry the souls of sailors who were lost at sea. And women on board would anger the sea gods, but not if they're naked. Naked women will calm the sea. So if you guys are ever out to sea and the storm comes up, just have one of the women get naked. All right. Now, boarding the ship with the left foot starts the whole journey off on the wrong foot. And no bananas on board. And believe it or not, this is still practiced today. There are a lot of ships and captains that will not allow bananas on board. And really the main reason for this is this right here. Yes, they would actually find that some poisonous spiders could actually live inside of bananas, and they would actually escape because there are some spiders that will lay eggs in bananas. Yes. The SS Orang Medan. This is a very interesting legend, and I say legend because no one can actually prove if this is true or not. But it has been a story that has been published, and what it is actually a ship that was discovered around June of 1947, and they actually a vessel nearby received an SOS call from the ship, and it basically had stated that all the crew are dead, the captain is dead, and then there was a long pause. And then like a few minutes later, they got another message that said, I die. And no other messages were received. And when they finally discovered the ship and boarded it, they found that all the passengers were all dead and frozen. And they were all on their back, looking up towards the sun with their eyes wide open and their mouths froze open as well. And no one knows exactly what happens or what happened here. This is one of the biggest mysteries or nautical mysteries, but then it's also stated that this has not been proven either, that this case actually really happened. Now, one reason why they're not able to prove this is as they were tugging the boat back to shore, unfortunately, one of the engines on the Medan actually caught on fire and caused the ship to explode and sink. So they didn't have any proof. Now the Sea King, this is a ship that actually is known in the Seattle area, but its origins are actually from the East Coast. Now this was built in 1877. And when it was built, it was actually one of the largest vessels built outside of Maine at the time. Now, in 1906, it was actually in San Francisco when the Great San Francisco earthquake had struck. Now, this was an earthquake of a 7.8, and 3,000 people died in this earthquake, and over 80% of San Francisco was destroyed. Now, The ship didn't take on any damage, so it was able to sail out. But one of the things that they do before these ships set out to sea is they fill the ballast. A lot of times they'll use rock and a lot of soil, and anything that was heavy enough to cause the ship to be more balanced when it was going to be out to sea. Now, of course, San Francisco had a lot of rubble to get rid of. So they decided to go ahead and take all this rubble into the ballast to help balance up the ship. Now, as it made its way back to Seattle, because now its main focus was to, load up with lumber and bring it back to San Francisco to help rebuild the city. But again, as it was on its way to Seattle, many of the crew did not have a good time. They felt that there was something very eerie going on aboard the ship. They would hear strange noises, strange moans in the middle of the night, the sounds of people walking around the ship in the middle of the night when everybody was already in bed. And so by the time they got back to Seattle, many of the crew wanted off the ship. Well, as they were unloading the ballast of the ship of all this rubble from San Francisco, to their surprise, they found the twisted bodies of victims from the San Francisco earthquake. Ever since then, they felt that the ship was cursed. And this was a hard thing for a ship, especially when you can't maintain a crew. Because again, remember, all these sailors are very superstitious. Well, they had actually sold the ship many times. And they'd actually, she made her way back to the East Coast. And by the time she got back to the East Coast, she had actually had 110 days without loss of sail or hand. So they actually felt that the ship was starting to get past this curse. Well, back in 1917, a storm hit the East Coast and it sank the ship, and she was never seen again. Dominion Tug. Now, this is a tugboat that actually started out as a military tugboat. It is actually out in Bremerton. We've actually had the opportunity to investigate this tugboat a number of times now. We've actually spent the night on the tugboat as well. Now, I was actually invited out to the tugboat because Dave, who is the owner, he had recently purchased a tugboat and was trying to fix it. He said that he actually received the tugboat in very poor conditions. Now, he thought it wasn't as bad until one day just things just started getting worse and worse for this boat. And in fact, the boat was on its last legs. And he said that there were times that he felt that there was a presence on board. One day, he was actually on the phone talking to a friend of his when all of a sudden he felt something come from behind him and walk right through him. And as it walked right through him, he could see the back of a man in overalls walk away and then vanish. Now, this is not the first experience he had had. There had been quite a few stories and experiences. And I know, June, you actually have your personal experience. Do you want to share yours?
Sure. We were doing an investigation one night. And when we were doing this investigation, I couldn't sleep. So I stayed up all night while, Ross and Philemon kind of took a snooze for a little bit. And I was still awake. I think it was about 4:00 in the morning, around that time frame. And all of a sudden, I start hearing heavy shoes walking towards me. Now, they kind of had this gangplank or this gangplank, but this plank put down that was metal, metal and wood, I think, around that. And it was a walkway, so you didn't fall through to the bottom floor. And I heard very loud footsteps walking towards me, and I assumed it was either Ross or Philemon coming to check on me, just to see if I was still awake or they couldn't sleep or something.
Or still alive.
And still, see if I was still alive. And so I was waiting and I thought, well, that's weird. And I'm hearing them walking, but I'm not seeing anybody. So I walked further over there and there was nobody, but I heard very, very distinct loud footsteps,
Yeah.
very loud footsteps, actually. And so that was really interesting.
And it's a great boat. It is actually opened up as a museum. So if you are in Bremerton, at the Bremerton Ferry Terminal there, you'll actually see all the boats there. It is there. It's also by the USS Turner Joy,
Hmm.
which I'll talk about as well. Now, the SS Watertown. This is an interesting story because the ship itself actually had an unexpected event where a couple men were actually killed on a fire on the boat. And so they had a burial at sea. And one day the captain was actually taking pictures because they kept claiming that they were seeing something in the water. And they described them as faces. And so, of course, the captain, wanted to document this. And so he actually took a picture. And in this photo, you can actually see these faces. And they claim that these faces look like the men that had actually died in the fire on the ship. And this is one of the first nautical pieces of evidence when it comes to the paranormal that has actually been captured. And as you can see in this photo here, this photo is actually from 1925. And I'll zoom in on that. And there you are. You can see the two faces of the men. Now we'll continue on with the USS Turner Joy. This is a retired Navy destroyer. It's in Bremerton as well. And it is also a museum where you can actually wander aboard the ship and check out all the berthing quarters. And it's an amazing place. I'm very fortunate to have the opportunity to investigate this place numerous amount of times. Now, there are quite a few stories of men being seen wandering around the ship, men dressed in naval uniforms. I have been alone on the ship quite a few times because when we do our public ghost hunts, I will have to arrive early after the ship is closed down and unlock the gate and turn off the alarm and get everything set up for the public investigations. And there are times as I'm walking alone in this big metal ship, you can actually clearly hear somebody walking behind you. Of course, you stop and then it stops a few steps later. So I've experienced that a number of times, but I've also captured some amazing EVPs from this place. And I'm going to play you guys a couple of them because I know we're already at the halfway point. So let's play a couple here and then I'll tell you guys the story.
Did you die on this boat? Or did you know someone that died on this boat?
So I don't know if you guys could hear that well, but in this one, the investigators, there's two investigators, male, female. They're in one of the berthing quarters, and this is one of the berthing quarters where a lot of times you'll actually hear whistling. And so one of the investigators, a male investigator, he actually heard a whistle. And so he looked over to the female and he asked if that was her. And of course she says, no, that wasn't me. And so he tells her, just be careful how you're breathing. Sometimes when you breathe through your nose, you can make a whistle noise. And so he brings that up. But right after he'd asked that question, it was that you can clearly hear somebody say, it's me. And so after that, when he asks, do do you know somebody who might have died on this boat? We clearly get the response, Greenlee. Now, there were quite a good handful of soldiers that actually were aboard the ship with the last name Greenlee, so we're not sure exactly which one this could be. So that was pretty interesting, and I'll play it one more time for you guys, so listen carefully. I'll turn up my volume too, so you hear a little better.
Did you die on this boat? Or did you know someone that died on this boat? No, shut off.
Sorry about that. So the next one, now the next one is one of my favorites because I actually was there when this was captured. Me and my team member were actually dressed in naval uniforms. This is what we call triggers. We're hoping that whatever there or who's ever there will respond to us thinking that we're part of the crew. And he actually is telling me that he doesn't have to wear his uniform for more than 5 hours because he's actually in the Navy. And so he wore his traditional whites as I was in the old blues that they would have worn at the time when this ship was active. And in this recording, you'll hear it's just me and him talking, but you'll also hear what sounds like a fight breaking out in the background. And then somebody yells, butt kicking. All right. And I'll tell you the rest of the story after this. So listen carefully.
I don't think I've ever wore these things longer than 5 hours. Now that...
Yeah. Now, we had submitted this EVP to the director of the ship, and he sat on this evidence for quite some time. Never heard from him for years. When all of a sudden, out of the blue, he contacts me, and he says the strangest thing happened. Now, every so often, men that served on the ship will return. And so whenever they do return, they try to, you know, talk to them and get some more stories of what it was like when the ship was still active. And this guy takes, you know, Steve, who was the director at the time, around the ship, and he gets down to the refrigeration area, and he says, oh, do I have a story to tell you? He said that while he was serving, there was this little cook and this big cook. And this big guy constantly picked on that little guy. And one day when those two were down there, that big guy started picking on that little guy, and that little guy just snapped, and he went after that big guy. And he says that was the biggest butt kicking I had ever seen. And that was the oddest thing, that he would actually use the term butt kicking, because sailors have the, you know, dirtiest mouths. But soon as he had said that word butt kicking, it triggered the EVP that we had actually captured in that room. And I think we captured that moment, that residual moment, when that fight actually had broken out. Oh, the Queen Mary, one of the most notorious haunted ships out there. Started out as a cruise ship, was later used for the military, and now it is actually a floating hotel in California. Now, I know I've had the opportunity to check out this place a couple times. I had a private tour where they actually took me to some of the haunted places. And I actually got to go in the pool area that is believed to be haunted by a little girl. They say that you may see her apparition wandering around. There's also stories where you'll see her wet footprints walking along the pool area. But I have to say that this is a very, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. This is an amazing investigation location if you ever get out there. I know, June, do you have anything you want to add to this one?
You know, I'm not sure. When we went, unfortunately, they had another event. The time that I went, I guess the only time I got to go, they had another event by a paranormal investigator that was on a TV show. And so a lot of the places that were considered the most haunted were shut down. So unfortunately, I didn't get to
They're booked
explore
for
the
the private
pool.
event.
Yeah.
Yeah, the pool is one of the places that is the most haunted. There's also a room that I've been told that is recently just opened up. It's been shut down for the longest time because
Oh,
they
yeah.
believe that is the most haunted room. Things have been thrown at people. They say a lot of people can't even stand to be in the room for more than an hour or two. And so they have now just recently opened it up, and you can actually stay the night in that room.
And I hear it's only a measly $850.
Oh, that's it? Oh, God. Yeah,
But
I don't.
I was just going to say it's very it just gets under your skin when you get in there. It just you can tell why so many people fall in love with the ship.
Mhm.
There's just something about it. It's an amazing place, and if you get a chance to go, definitely go.
And I know when you actually get to stay there, um, you don't really get to see all the ship.
Mm-mm.
In fact, I would say you probably only see a good, 25, maybe 30% of the ship that you can actually explore. There's so much to the ship that is not open to the public. Now, again, I had the opportunity to walk through a lot of the places that aren't open to the public. They're usually limited to just tours. Um, in fact, one of the most famous stories there is a young man that was killed when they were doing a fire drill. And when they have these, big geared doors that will actually seal up parts of the ship, and you have to get through these doors before they close. There's no way to stop them once they start going. And of course, this guy, I guess his timing was wrong. There's different stories. They say he went back to go get some tools and, kind of thought he could make it in time and didn't, and got caught between the door and was
Mm,
crushed.
just smash.
Yeah, a horrible way to go. But also there's stories that they were daring each other to see who could get through at the last moment, and he didn't make it. So we don't know exactly what happened, or we just know how it happened. But they do believe that his spirit roams around in the engine area as well. Now, I personally didn't have any experiences on the Queen Mary myself. A lot of times I was just walking through. I do have to say there is a lot of noises. And they
Hmm.
claim, that they can't explain, knocking noises, almost like, metal hitting metal type of sounds. Sometimes they seem to respond to you when you ask questions like, can you knock twice? And all of a sudden you hear that ping, ping right after you ask that. So there's a lot of what they claim to be intelligent responses to that as well. But there's also a lot of photos and EVPs if you look on the internet for evidence collected from the Queen Mary, and you'll see tons of them out there. And I'll actually show you guys some of the most popular um, claims. Like this one in the circle, they claim is the apparition of the young girl in the pool area. You can see the diving board right here. This was the pool, or actually it wasn't a diving board, that was a slide, I believe, into the pool. So that was the pool there. And again, when this pool has not had any water for decades, you will actually see the wet footprints of the little girl all around the pool area. I actually got to go into the old changing room as well. And here's another one where they claim that they captured the little girl in the pool area. You got this investigator standing here. And then, of course, they can't explain this image right here. They claim this is the little girl. And then this one they claim is the gentleman who was crushed by the door. And they claim to have captured him in the engine room area. Now, I cannot validate that these are real. Again, I was not there when they were taken. They're just photos that you will find on the internet as claims to the paranormal. Oh, the Kamloops, SS Kamloops. This is one of my favorite stories. This is about a ship that actually was lost in the Great Lakes. And when it was actually discovered, many people did not know what happened to the ship or its crew. Everybody did perish because if they actually survived getting off the boat before it sank, they did not survive the conditions when they actually found the bodies washed up ashore of the icy cold waters. So this actually was discovered in the 1930s. It was at the bottom of one of the lakes, and the lake is actually, the water is so sterile and so frigid that it becomes perfect for actually preserving the human remains. They say that there's a certain process where the fat actually starts to seep through the skin and calcifies around the skin, creating this white shell around the body. And they say it's almost like a soapy substance. And so when they finally discovered the ship and divers would actually go down and investigate, there is a gentleman that they call Old Whitey or Grandpa. And this is the remains of the man who went down with the ship. And he floats around in the engine room. And so many divers will say that there's this eerie presence when you see him, because his arms are actually, you know, stretched out like they're trying to grab you, and he just floats around. And sometimes they say that he almost follows these divers around the engine of the ship. Now, some people say this could very well be the current that they're causing as they're swimming around, that, you know, he gets caught up in that current and he'll follow them around. But there's also claims that there are apparitions seen down there as well. Many divers have been swimming past some of the rooms, and they swear that they'll see what looks like a gentleman standing in one of the rooms, and then he's no longer there. So if you ever get to see old Whitey, they say you can, you know, shake his hand and journal your experience with him. Now, haunted waters. They do believe water is a great vessel for a lot of this activity and energy when it comes to the world of paranormal. Now, Kim Davison was swimming with her friend Jessie and their 3 children, and you'll see them in this photo. And what's the most interesting thing is they discovered that where there is actually them, you'll actually see an extra person in the photo as well. And there was also claims that her daughter's leg was grabbed from something in the river. And in this photo, they found out that a 13-year-old girl had actually drowned in the river. And they claim that this could very well be the apparition of that little girl. And I'll go back a little bit. Sorry, hit the button too soon. But this is the newspaper clipping that talks about the little girl that had drowned, Doreen. And they say that this is her right there. Now you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people there. Yeah. And then 6 is the one circled. Lighthouses. Now, folklore lighthouses are extremely romantic icons. They were the guiding light to obviously guide sailors to safety, to light their way. But also lighthouses have been featured in the Bible. They've been featured in romantic novels. But they also have a tragic story as well. You know, where a lot of these, you know, women who are waiting for their loved ones to return from being out to sea, a lot of times these men don't come back for various different reasons. They may have found new love. They may have perished. We don't know. And so, of course, not knowing would drive a lot of these women mad or even to extreme levels of depression. And there are tons of stories of these women that will go to the lighthouse and leap from the cliffs or even jump from the lighthouse themselves. But you also have to consider that lighthouses were very secluded. It's a very unique person that actually could handle living the life of a lighthouse keeper, especially when you're in the middle of nowhere. A lot of times these are, on islands. And so I'm going to share you guys some of these stories and why some of these lighthouses very well could be haunted. Now, this lighthouse here was actually commissioned by George Washington himself in 1795. Now, the most famous story to this lighthouse is they say that when you are, taking a boat around this island, and some of these islands are still privately owned by the government. You're not allowed to walk onto the island. Now, most of these lighthouses now are operated by computers, so you don't need to, have somebody living on these islands, especially when they're so secluded and it's hard to get supplies and the necessary means to survive. So it just made it cheaper to make a lot of these lighthouses automatic now. So the story is that, again, as you're, taking a boat around the island, you may hear piano music playing in the distance. And legend has it that one of the lighthouse keepers had just recently married. And he and his wife thought this was going to be the most romantic getaway for these two to be alone on an island just after their wedding. So perfect little honeymoon, right? Well, to entertain his wife, he actually bought her a piano. Now they had to have this piano shipped to the lighthouse, and by the time it got to the lighthouse, the winter season was starting to settle in. And so he didn't stop to think that, unfortunately, when she received the piano, she was only given one sheet of piano music. And there was not enough time to go back across to get some other, music for her to learn. Now, she was one of those people, I guess, was a perfectionist. So being that she had this opportunity to learn the piano, she was going to make the best of it. So she practiced day in and day out that one piece of music over and over and over again. Now, I'm thinking you probably know where this story is going to go, but this drove her husband mad, listening to her tinker away at this piano, that same tune, haunting him day in and day out. It drove him so mad that one night he took an axe and he went to chop that piano into pieces. But his wife wouldn't let him, so she stood in front of that piano and received the blows herself, killing her. Now, they say this is the reason why you hear that piano playing so often late at night. Now, his story actually is that after he realized what he had done to her, he actually went to the top of the lighthouse and jumped. Now, there's also a story of a little girl. There is actually somewhere on the island the gravesite of a child. Now, again, this is a situation, especially in the winter months, where it is too hard to get into the nearest towns to deal with illnesses. So when the lighthouse keeper and his wife had a sick child, they did the best they could to take care of their child and not receive the help that they needed. And unfortunately, she died. And so they buried her body on the island because they did not want to have to wait until they could actually take her to the local graveyard. Now, they say that her spirit also haunts this lighthouse. Many people have actually seen this little girl. You might hear her talking, giggling, but a lot of times people have actually heard her coughing. There was a film crew doing a documentary on lighthouses And one of the guys who was not a big believer in ghosts and constantly, poo-pooed the idea of a little girl haunting this place, he went into the bathroom to do his business, and to his surprise, he was not able to leave the bathroom because the door had become locked and jammed in a way that they literally had to break open the door to get him out of there. And they do believe that it was the little girl that caused that. One night, one woman was spending the night in the lighthouse, and she woke up to hearing the sounds of what sounded like people talking. And when she went to explore, she found that the radio had been turned on. Now, of course, she turns off the radio, goes back to sleep, and about a half hour later, wakes up to that same sound, the radio going again. She goes back down, turns it off, and again goes back up to sleep, and again is awoken another 35 and 40 minutes later to that radio playing by itself. So that is constant phenomena that has been reported at this location as well. But one of my favorite stories is after the lighthouse had been automated, they were moving out. The last keeper was getting ready to leave. They had actually sent out a crew to pack up the furniture and just strip the building down and leave it to its own devices on the island. Well, one night as they're packing up everything, one of the Coast Guard members who was there to help move things was awoken in the middle of the night by his bed frantically shaking. And he, of course, wakes up and he looks around and he sees this dark figure standing at the foot of his bed. And and he hears a voice come from it, and he says, please leave my home alone, leave the furniture. And then it just vanished. Well, unfortunately, that event didn't stop them from proceeding to move everything out of the building. And as they started to load everything up into the little boat and getting ready to lower the boat into the water, for some strange reason, the chains snapped and that boat went crashing down into the water and sank with all the remains of the house in it. And they do believe it was the spirit of that former keeper telling them, you're not going to take my home away from me. Point Outlook Lighthouse. This is another lighthouse that has been featured on a lot of television shows, so there's a lot of stories out there. But really, I wanted to bring this into this presentation because there's actually some interesting evidence collected that has been presented on the internet. And so I try to throw in a little bit of evidence. Now, I have not personally had the opportunity to investigate this place, but I do know that there are stories of soldiers, Civil War soldiers around this building and in the area. And one psychic was doing an investigation and felt that there was something there. And when they took a picture, this actually showed up. Now, the figure in black is the psychic. And she says that there's somebody standing beside me. And so she told the person with the camera, this is film, to take a picture. And in that photo, you can see what looks like a Civil War soldier standing off to the side here. Hasita Head Lighthouse. This is actually in Oregon. And this is another lovely story to tell. This is actually has a story of a woman that haunts this location. Her name is Rue. Now, they received that name through a seance that they had done with a Ouija board, and they claimed that the Ouija board had spelled out R-U-E, Rue, so they'd called her Rue ever since then. But she's also described to be a gray lady. Now, the most notorious story is actually when they were doing some work on the lighthouse. Now, this is the lighthouse itself. There is actually a keeper's house down further. And so they were actually doing some work on the keeper's house. And a gentleman was outside doing some stripping of the paint. They were getting ready to paint the building. And so he was going around stripping the old paint off the building, and he accidentally broke the attic window. And so the glass had actually, when you break a window from the outside, the glass is going to be on the inside. Now, of course, he was hesitant to go into the attic because he had already had an experience in the attic that he was not too happy about. In fact, prior to him breaking that attic window, he had actually been in the attic prepping the windows, making sure that they were sealed for the winter seasons. And as he was cleaning the window on the inside, he noticed in the reflection a woman standing behind him. And of course, when he turns around, there's nobody there. Now, he had already been told that this place was haunted, and this was enough to make it to the point where he never wanted to go back into the attic again. So now, after he had broken the attic window and realizing that the glass was on the inside in the attic space, he wasn't going to go in there and clean up that broken glass. So he repaired the window from the outside. Now, that night, the owners of the keeper's house were awoken by what sounded like scraping noises in the attic space. It was just this long scraping. And so they really didn't, do anything about it until the next day when they went up into the attic to try and figure out what made that noise. And to their surprise, they found that all the glass had been swept into a nice little pile. So those are some of the examples of Rue and what she's been known to do. Now, she's also very well known that if people are causing too much of a disturbance, like loud parties and stuff like that, she will turn off the music. Music, for some reason, will just stop when things get too loud. Or if she doesn't like guests, she'll turn on the fire alarms and try to get them out of the building as well. So that is the story of Rue. Block Island is another great story. A beautiful building, as you can see here. But Block Island is actually haunted by a woman who does not like men. And her story is that she was, again, the lighthouse keeper's wife. And her husband were on the island for themselves. And she apparently was a very nagging woman. And her husband just had enough. Being isolated with this woman, all she did was nag. He actually pushed her off the lighthouse. And so they do believe that she has come back and has haunted men of this lighthouse after she was murdered. And one story is that one lighthouse keeper was actually alone, and he was watching the house for, I think he was supposed to be there for a couple months. And he noticed the oddities right away. It was a situation where, you'd get to the lighthouse, start unpacking your clothes, put them in the drawers of the dresser, you'd step away, and you'd come back and find that all your clothes are now back in the suitcase. So being that that was the case, a lot of men knew that she did not like them there. So one night, this gentleman was awoken by the bed again shaking up and down frantically, that he ran out of the house, and right when he ran out of the house, the door slammed behind him, and he stood outside. It was a cold winter night. He's standing there shaking. He's in nothing but his underwear, and he goes to, he has to get back inside the building because he's freezing, and to his surprise, the door is locked. So this poor guy is locked out of the lighthouse in the middle of the winter. He literally had to call the Coast Guard to come and get him back into the building. Yeah. So she will do everything she can to scare these guys out of this building. I mean, lighthouse keepers have been so terrified that they will be they'll run into the closet and hide in the closet. When they go to cook their food, the temperature will be turned all the way up to where the food will burn. Just all kinds of interesting things like that. So Block Island is another amazing haunted location. Now, Blackhead Lighthouse is another one of those where an interesting photo was captured when a small group of young people decided to investigate the place on their own. And to their surprise, they captured this dark, shadowy figure by the lighthouse. And I will actually show you a zoomed, lightened version of it. Now, again, this woman is just standing there smoking her cigarette. They claim that this is nobody in their party. And you can see it almost looks cloaked. But again, I cannot validate this. It is an interesting photo. It's not, I would not say that it has been tampered with, like photoshopped, because it does seem to fit within the pixelation of the photo itself. A lot of times you can tell if a photo has been doctored, photoshopped, or anything like that, because the pixelation of the added image doesn't always match up with the background. That's one of the ways you can tell if a photo has been doctored. So this does seem to match up to the background, but as to what it is, I'm not sure. It does have a good human-like figure, so it very well could be something. St. Augustine Lighthouse. This is another great place. Another historic place as well. Is built in 1874. It is one of the oldest structures in St. Augustine. It is an icon. You can see from the white and black stripes going up the lighthouse, and of course with the red top. Now, me and June have actually had the opportunity to investigate this place, and I know we've actually had some interesting experiences. So I know I've been talking away here. June, do you have anything that you want to share about this place?
It seems that I can't remember all the stuff that happened to us there, because we got to explore it all by ourselves for a couple of hours. At least, so which was really amazing. It was before the public came in, so it was just Ross and I in there. But it seems like we heard, and we hear a woman say something. We heard a few other things, and then we heard walking on the steps.
Right. So I do have to admit, my biggest fear is not ghosts or being in the dark or being in, a haunted place. My biggest fear is heights. All right. So I go to this lighthouse, and of course it's got the big iron, staircase that goes up in a spiral up to the top. And it's one of those, staircases where you can, be standing on one of the steps and see right through it. But I have to say that my main goal was to at least make it to the third floor, because that is where the apparition was captured when ghost hunters filmed there. And I'll show you that photo in a bit here, because I do have that part of this presentation. So I at least wanted to make it to that location. So, but again, where you think it's the third floor, with how tall this building is, the third floor is actually the 6th floor, because the distance between them is doubled. So I do have to say that being that I had the lighthouse to myself at that time, this is the first time that I was actually there. The second time was when we brought June to the location. So awesome. I had the lighthouse to myself. I was in there for a good, hour or so, and I slowly made my way up to that 3rd floor. And I do have to say that, yeah, there are noises in this place that I couldn't explain. Now, I don't work here, so I'm not here on an everyday basis, and you become familiar with a lot of the sounds that some buildings make, and a lot of those noises can be explained, can be natural. But there was like almost what it sounded like footsteps above me. Like there was somebody continuing to walk higher, trying to avoid me. So I did experience that. I think that was my only experience the first time there. and then I know that you yourself, it was what was it? I think I decided to try and go up, and you and one other woman was with us, and you guys were sitting down at the
Yeah, she
foot.
had a broken leg.
Oh, that's right.
So, so I decided to stay with her down in the bottom.
It had nothing to do with stairs, did it?
I was like, I'll keep her company because she was scared too. So I had to hold her hand. She was really scared.
And I think that's when you guys heard the voice.
Yeah,
You guys
we
were
did.
alone.
Yeah,
You guys were alone. I
we were
was still at the
completely alone down there. Everybody else was all the way up. And it was like something right in the microphone, which I wish I would have found. But yes, we did have a recording.
I
of
know
it.
I threw you in on this at the last minute. Should have grabbed your EVP from there. But it is an amazing place. And again, it's one of those places where there's just hundreds and hundreds of stories.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Pertaining to this place. There's a story where a man was killed when he was on scaffolding outside of the lighthouse, working on the tower, and he fell to his death. There's also a story where one of the lighthouse keeper's children
yeah,
were playing in a cart. It was like a mining cart, wasn't it? And they were riding the cart. It was going down a hill, and it flipped and went right into the water. And did it kill one of them, or did it kill?
Yeah. I think it killed one of them.
Yeah.
I think it was an old coal cart that they had when they, or something that brought the supplies up from the shore,
Right.
to there, or something like that. So.
Yeah, and they were playing around on it, writing it down, and that's when it hit the bottom. It was going too fast, and it flipped and went right into the water, killing one of the children. And so they do believe that one of the children does also haunt the location as well. Now, if you ever get out to St. Augustine and you have the opportunity to check out this lighthouse, they do have public ghost hunts, so you can actually investigate the place as well. Usually it's with a huge group. Now, one of the things I've done it one of the nights when they had the huge group, and what people will do is everybody will immediately go to the lighthouse. So everybody will immediately go to the lighthouse, leaving the keeper's house completely unattended. And so that's what I would do, as I'd go to lighthouse, the keeper's house first, and have that to myself. And then everybody, once they're done with the lighthouse, will start to come over to the keeper's house. And once everybody's over the keeper's house, then I go to lighthouse, and then you have the lighthouse completely to yourself. And I find that that's the biggest pattern, is everybody wants to go to the most haunted place right away, and then they'll move their way to the rest of the building. So I tend to find that when you do these group ghost hunts with the public, the best way to avoid the public is just go to the places where they're not going to want to go to first. So, all right. So moving on, and I will show you guys some of the photos of some of the most interesting evidence collected from the lighthouse. And this is a photo where they claim they captured the woman at the top of the lighthouse that should not have been there. There shouldn't have been anybody there. And you'll see this woman standing at the top of the lighthouse. And then, of course, this is the famous clip from the Ghost Hunters episode where they were filming up the lighthouse and the shadow figure peered out from the railing and then went back in. And again, you can find that on the internet. You can find the video clip and see that actually happen. So in closing, in saying goodbye, I just wanted to, make known that this is dedicated to the men and women that have faced the ocean's fury and fought to the bitter end. It's also to the men and women who have been the guiding lights in making sure our journey home is safe. Your sacrifice is not gone unnoticed. May your spirits live on and your stories be told forever. Thank you guys, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.